Hello and welcome. So last time I was testing out headscale, just try to see how it behaves, how it works, trying to build a homelab, VPN, kind of like private network that can allow me to connect different devices. And of course that had some limitations. I was testing that locally on my host machine and doing that, connecting some VMs to it. And of course works on my machine, works only on that environment. The idea was now to be able to deploy that to the web, be able to deploy that to a hosting that it's outside of my local network, that I can connect the different devices on my local network or different networks in order for them to be able to build this mesh network to connect the devices together. And for that, I'm going to use Fly.io. Fly.io, it's hosting for applications that make it really easy to deploy applications. They have a free tier, allows you to deploy to different regions, and that's cool because I'm located in France right now, and the closer I can run the servers, the better, right? What I'm going to do is adjust the headscale configuration that I did on the previous video to run it on Fly, then create all the resources that I need for running the application on Fly, and then maybe use something that I didn't use the last time, which is pre-authenticated keys, with the potential of like thinking like maybe I can provision some servers automatically later, and then getting those servers automatically connected into the network, maybe with something like Cloud Config or things like that, or on Terraform Cloud Config to get those automatically connected to my headscale mesh network. But that's for another time. And of course, for another time is like, okay, cool, I deploy all this, how I can safely restore, because like backups are really important, and making sure that you can have like a business continuity plan, even if it's your local network, so you don't spend all the hours setting things up from scratch again, right? But we'll see that later. Now, first things first, this was the compose file that I was using at that moment. I'm not going to be using that anymore because I'm going to be deploying this to a server, but I will still use that for not running locally, but I still use that for building, right? And the first thing that I did is like I introduced some changes to the Docker file. First, I updated the headscale version since my previous video. They're running, they're like the new version 0.20. So I did an update on that. And something that I found that I was missing is copy the configuration file within the image, because how Fly works is it takes your container image or builds a container image for you, and then creates a micro VM or a VM specifically for your application. So it needs to contain all the configuration, all the elements within the same image. And before I didn't have that, so I added that, and also adjusted the entry point of the Docker file, because since I was using Alpine, it was trying to do the Ash shell, and adjusting this here, now it's going to run the headscale server as the entry point, right? So that's the first thing that I did. What I'm going to do here is just do a compose build app headscale, headscale, just to confirm that that's building, that it's working. And no, it's not working because I don't have my configuration file. So I need to create one, my configuration file for headscale. So what I did is create a template for it, because on the headscale configuration, you need to provide a server URL. And it's a kind of like a chicken and egg situation. You don't know the URL until you create a Fly application, or you know the domain that you're going to give, but you need to create the application, you need to provision certificates if you want to use your own domain. And once you have all those things, then you can deploy the application. So we're going to do kind of like a different type of deployment of what the recommendation or the instructions on Fly gives you. I'm going to just run things step by step. And the first thing is, okay, I have a template for my headscale configuration. I have I already had the listening address at port 8080. I changing the metrics to be on public and port 9090. Not publicly, because this is not going to be exposed to the internet, but publicly to Fly, in order for them to be able to fetch the metrics of how the application is working, and we might take a look to that later. Then the other adjustment that I did here that wasn't present on my previous video was like I adjusted the derp. This is a relay set of servers provided by Tailscale that gives you options to access NAT devices, NAT devices, when they cannot open ports, so they can negotiate in order to be able to connect from different networks. I disabled the check updates, sorry, and also adjusted the database path to be into a volume, not into the bar-lev directory it was before. Now I put it into a different directory that I'm going to be able to mount a data volume where I'm going to store. Last but not least, there's the DNS configuration, and I left the base domain, something that you can configure. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab all this file, come to config, place it, right, and save it as headscale.yaml. And I'm going to adjust the server URL and the base domain manually. Okay, so that's the first thing. The second thing is we have a template for Fly, the application. I made a template so I can replace the Fly name and the mount of the data. So what we're going to do is create an application on Fly, and then we're going to create a volume for that application, and then we're going to copy this configuration. So first things first, I'm going to try to build again. This time it's going to work because the configuration file exists and it creates the local image that I can use, right? But we don't have the right name for the server. So what we're going to do is create an application first. So going to apps, Fly control apps create. I'm going to use generate a name. I don't know what name it's going to give me, but that will allow me to later erase this and people don't exploit it, right? So when you're doing testing and recording things like that. So I'm going to copy this name and use this name on my headscale configuration that I had it here. So I'm going to replace this, and this I will give the protocol HTTPS. The name of this is going to be fly.dev, and I need to specify the port. That's a requirement from headscale. And then I need to modify my base domain. My base domain, I'm going to just use the one that I used before, which is my website, luislavena.info, right? Okay, I save that file and I have it now for the image. But now we need a volume to store the data, right? So I'm going to do the same thing, volumes, create, and I'm going to use the application name that I had here. And I'm going to do the region, it's going to be Charles de Gaulle, which is France, Paris. I'm going to give the size, it's going to be 1 gigabyte, right? And that's it. Oh, I need to give a volume name, sorry. I'm going to use headscale data. So this is going to create a volume that by default is going to be encrypted, which is great for security purposes. So this is encrypted at rest, and that means that my data, even that I can access to it, doesn't necessarily mean that it's stored at plane for that. Cool. So I have my app name here, I have my volume, and what I'm going to do now is copy my template for Fly and put it at the root of my my repository that I'm going to use. And I'm going to copy the same thing that I did for the server name. Going to copy it here for the app name. I'm going to replace it, paste it here. So that's the name of my application. And as you can see here, the internal port is 8080. Then is going to have the HTTP, but force redirect to HTTPS. It's going to do automatically TLS termination. I'm going to be mounting that volume that I created, so it's headscale data, into the data directory. And I'm going to save this as fly.toml file. And I'm also enabling the metrics on port 9090 slash metrics. That's the option on headscale to expose metrics. Okay, so I have this configuration. I have the volume. I did the changes to the headscale file, and now I can go and deploy. So with that, I can do flyctl deploy. Now what this is going to do is try to build an image for this, and for that purpose, if not mistaken, it's going to try to boot up a builder inside Fly. Yes, so got a remote builder. It copied the Docker file and all the configuration, the context to that remote builder. Is building the image in that builder and then push into an internal registry on Fly with that image, right? And next is going to try to deploy the application. So let's see, pushes the image, he built a deployment for it, he created a release, and now you can click to monitor the deployment. It says version 0 is being deployed. So we have here the logs. I could run flyctl logs for that application on my console, but I can also come here on the dashboard for Fly. If I refresh here, I will have the application, young snowflake, and I can go to monitoring. That will be exactly the same thing. So now it's booting up the application. Now headscale started, and since it didn't have any private file, it created the private file and the noise private files. It loaded the derp map, and it's listening on the HTTP, and it's sending the metrics to port 9090. And we can see here on the statistics, it's telling me the process, it's called app. It says it's running, all the health checks pass by default, and that means that this application is operational. If I come here and I click on this, as you might remember, this just responds with a 200. It doesn't render anything, it just responds to a 200, right? What we can do now, since we have the application deployed, we can do Fly on SSH console. We're going to get into that deployment, and as we remember, if we do into the data directory, we have our database here, we have the keys that were created, perfect. And if we do headscale users list, it will be empty, it doesn't have a user. So what I'm going to do is create my homelab user, right? Users created. So if I list, I get the user. And the next thing that I'm going to create is I'm going to create a key that I can use multiple times to add all the nodes that I wanted, right? And if we go back to the documentation on headscale when running on Linux, it says register machine using a pre-authenticated key. And you have an expiration of 24 hours for that. So I'm just going to copy this, come here and change here. This is my first username. I'm just going to say homelab. And this is going to generate a key. This is the key that I'm going to be using on the different nodes to access, to connect to Tailscale. So I'm just going to save it here, and I'm going to copy the, it says Tailscale up, the login server, and the authentication key towards it. So what I'm going to do, it's going to be Tailscale up, the login server is going to be my server that I have here, right? And then I need to say auth key, and it's the key that I have here. I'm just going to toggle the, there you go, just a single line, really long, all good. Okay, I'm going to go here. I have two nodes here. Two are the original VMs that I used on the video before, node 1, node 2. They are all having Tailscale showing here. It says this log out, it's not there. So I'm going to log this first node, connect to that, and pass in the authentication key. Okay, so if I take Tailscale status, it says node 1 home lab. Okay, cool. if I come here and take a look to nodes list, I see the node here is detected online and gave it this IP for my and then the name is node 1. Cool. So I can go and do the same thing for node 2. Cool. And if I click status, let's just do status here, node 1, node 2, perfect. And here is a server that I booted up on Scaleway. Scaleway is a hosting provider here in Europe. I'm running this on France, also on the same, on Paris, on the same region, but it could be somewhere else. And I already have headscale installed here. This is an Ubuntu server, and the other ones were like Alpine Linux. So I'm going to try to log in again. Cool. And I will try to do scale status. I have all the nodes there. So 1, 2, 3, and this own computer. So on this node, which is running on a remote server, and the node 1 that is running on my local computer, I'm just going to try to do headscale ping node 1. So as you can see, it says via derp Paris, 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 until it resolves my local IP, the IP of my connection at home in order to obtain a port towards it. So that's great, it's resolving. And I'm going to try to do the same thing here. I will try to do from the node 2 ping to that other node. And I got a pong automatically from that because it didn't have to resolve through the derp map. So that's good, didn't have to figure out the mappings. And what I can do now, since I'm doing the DNS, I can do, can I ping node 1 homelab luislavena.info. So this is trying to do regular ping. It will try to resolve that connection. That will be interesting to see if that works or not. And seems not. That's interesting. So let's try to do here ping. It worked. And when I do the ping, oh, now it's working. Okay. So it seems that it didn't find a way to routing first. Maybe it's because I'm running all those things in my local machine. But I get it the regular ping. And of course, if I try to SSH into the server, let's say I'm just going to try to see if I can get into that other server that I have here, which is this crazy name. If I come here and enter that here, I'm going to try to ping and see if that works. I think the first time it's doing it, it takes a long time, but then after that, establish a connection gives you kind of like a good timing on it. So that's good. Cool. So, and if I take a look here, I have all my nodes with that. I was mentioning at the beginning, maybe you want to use those expiration key when you're provisioning multiple servers at once, or when you're using something like cloud config, when you're doing provisioning. That's something that you can do here on Scaleway when you're creating a server. You can come here to advanced options, and you have the cloud init or cloud configuration elements that you can put here to install headscale for you and then connect to your server automatically. Or you could be using something like Terraform to provisioning all your servers and then doing the cloud configuration to fetch that. And that's great. So have this application running, which is the headscale server that you can take a look here, what's going on. And then there is something really interesting, which is flymetrics.net is going to offer you a Grafana thing. And of course you can see all my previous testing, but this is the one, Young's Snowflake, the one we're testing. It says that all the requests coming from Charles de Gaulle, most of the intensity ones. Memory utilization, it's around 40 megabytes, not much. App concurrency, this is the number of requests that were given, but it's only using a single volume, so hard drive usage is only 80 megabytes or things like that. And here is for the HTTP requests and timing, response times and things like that. So you can get this Grafana overview, which is pretty cool, to be honest. So you get all the information about the activity of your application from it. So it's kind of cool. Okay, that's it. I think next time I would like to test, as I was mentioning to you, try to see if I can backup this safely using some backup mechanism, or how I can make this provisioning more easily. For example, so I don't have to set up the server URL. It's not that I'm going to be setting this up too often, but how I can make this server URL configuration a more simple, or the domain, so I can just set up some variables on the fly deployment, and then I just deploy the existing image, and boom, I get a server, headscale server without too much configuration, potentially for testings and things like that. So cool, that's it. Let me know in the comments if you like this, or if you like to know a little bit more about backup configuration and things like that. I think that will be my next video on this topic, and I hope you like it, and take care and have fun. Bye.